Good morning. I'm Lynn Courtney, and it's my great honor to serve as a deacon here at First Church Unitarian. And I'd like to share some of our community matters announcements with you this morning. First of all, thank you to Molly for that lovely original composition that we heard during the gathering video. And thank you today to the Artemis Singers, who are presenting a service in celebration of 100 years of women's suffrage. Some other things to note: next Sunday will be our celebration of Earth Day. More to come on that. If you look in your community matters, which you would have received on the listserv if you're are on that list, Vicki has offered some activities for kids that might come in very handy during this time of staying at home. One piece of news particularly that you'll find details about again in community matters is that the GA, the UUA General Assembly, its annual the annual meeting of our denomination is now going to be held virtually in June, and so that hopefully will help more people to attend, and you will find the details, as I said, on in your community matters. Also, Carolyn is offering what I believe is an ongoing series on women's interplay next Saturday. Well, it was this Saturday afternoon. I think it may be going on later, but there's information on that, and you can contact Carolyn if you have more questions about it. A couple of other things that are not in community matters that I wanted to add is that you will be getting notices about the annual meeting, which will be held as usual on the third Sunday in May. And then there will be a budget meeting. I believe that's on the first Sunday in May, but more details will be coming about that. So please plan to join both of those. And then also the deacons will be offering our, this I believe, workshop that we've talked to you about. We're just pinning down the date. It's probably either going to be the first Saturday in May in the afternoon or the following Tuesday, and we will let you know about that soon. And we would ask you to sign up in advance for that if you are interested, just to help us plan. We're not going to turn anyone away at the door, so to speak, but please sign up if you can. And often at the beginning of our service, the last thing we do is remind people to shut off their electronic devices, but we don't have to do that now because we're all on electronically. So please enjoy the service.
our call to worship. And then all that has divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied, and then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again. The words of Judy Chicago. Let us worship. This is a time where we would light our chalice together in our sanctuary. I'm going to light one here, and if you have a chalice at home, I encourage you to light it now as well. If you wish, please join me in saying the words of our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Good morning. Welcome to First Church Unitarian in Littleton live online worship service. I think we're on worship service number 6 live online in this difficult and strange time of sheltering in place or quarantining ourselves due to the coronavirus. But we're so happy that we can still be together virtually. This morning, a few thank yous to start. Thank you to Lynn, Courtney, our deacon, our head deacon, for doing the community matters and welcoming this morning. Thank you to Molly Lozu, our music director, for providing the original song, August song, that you heard in the gathering video, if you got on a little bit early. Beautiful song. Thank you, a big thank you to Mike Pilman, who is our virtual church mouse or something. We have to come up with a proper name for Mike, but he really did a lot of work to put today's service videos together, and we thank him for that. And of course, thank you to the Artemis Singers, the wonderful group from First Church Unitarian in Littleton that is leading this service virtually. They recorded songs virtually, putting together individual recordings. And we're in for a treat on this Suffragette Sunday, I'm calling it. And that first song you heard them sing, the Prelude, was the Artemis Singers with some of the children from our church, as I understand it. And so that's great. And I think we hear the kids again for our Postlude. So don't forget to join us after the service for our virtual joys and concerns. You'll see the listserv email with that Zoom link. And as Lynn noted, next Sunday is going to be the service in honor of Earth Day. In particular, this Wednesday, the 22nd of April, is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So it's kind of a big deal. So I'm looking forward to that. And with that, I'd love to kick us off with our time for all ages. And Vicki Merriam, our wonderful Director of Religious Education, will be leading our time for all ages. And I see that she's in the process of coming on now. So when she's on screen, I will let her take us away.
Apparently I need Mike to turn me on.
Let me see if I can
Or somebody
help you here. I'm asking to start video, and hopefully it's giving you some message to click on. There you are. All right.
Hi. How's everybody? It certainly is a beautiful day out today, isn't it? I can't wait to get outside. So yesterday, however, as you all know, it snowed. Some places more than other. I had about 4 inches. I had originally planned to plant some pansies. You can see them over here. They're kind of blue and yellow. They're very pretty and they're very hardy. They don't mind cold, but they're not crazy about snow. So I went out to look at them, and each of these little flowers had a little snow cap on it. And I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to plant them today. So here they are, my pretty pansies. They survived. They're very tenacious. They don't give under to things like snow. And they have survived. And for me, that sort of becomes a symbol of two different things that are happening this week. As Laura mentioned, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day happens this week, a time when people stood up for what they believed and made changes. We can see the changes today. We can see there's more work to be done. But without those people 50 years ago starting us on the road and making us think about it and then take action, we wouldn't be here today. They remind me of the pansies. The other thing is the suffragette movement, which began 100 years ago today, and which we're celebrating today after I finish, with music and words about some of the people who were important there. More people who stood up for what they believe to make changes that would benefit everyone. And that's the women's vote. Can't imagine a time when women couldn't vote or didn't have a whole lot of other rights. But there you are. It happens. And it takes people with courage and resilience and staying power, sort of like pansies, to make these things happen. So I like to think of it as a pansy. All these people who stood up are pansies in my book. And so every time I think about it and plant my pansies, I'm going to think, yeah, Earth Day, women's suffrage, and all the other civil rights that we continue to need to fight for. So be a pansy. Stand up for what you believe. And later today, I'm going to plant them. I see we have one family on, the Tatum and her kids. Hi.
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 How are you?
Good.
What's happening?
Nothing really much, but we just really planted some stuff in our gardens.
Today?
Yeah. Well,
This past week.
this past week.
Oh, and did the snow hurt that?
No. Not really, because we already have sprouts.
Wow. What'd you plant?
Well, I planted lettuce, potatoes, one onion, and I don't exactly remember what else, but I planted a couple flowers.
Great. And they're already coming up.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get out and get some lettuce in my garden. It's one of my favorite things to plant and eat.
Yep, I planted a lot of lettuce.
Did you? Yeah. What kind, do you know?
No.
No.
I don't
Just
know.
yummy lettuce.
Yeah.
So Eliza has lettuce and calendula and some potatoes, some sacred basil, and some tomatoes,
Surprise flowers.
and some surprise flowers.
Yeah.
That's
So do you each have your own garden?
Yeah.
Your own little section? Yeah. Cool. And I hope you're going to take care of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, they aren't going to grow
leave it, just leave it.
if you don't take care of it, right?
Yeah.
Right. Do you have anything else? Yep. Go ahead, Tatum.
I think they had a joke. If they
Oh,
are,
yeah.
yeah.
We always love jokes.
Would you like to tell a joke? You want to start? Who's got the first one?
I'll go first. What's a turtle's favorite game, Vicki?
I don't know. Checkers?
Peekaboo, because they hide in their shells.
Oh, yes, of course. That makes sense. Yeah.
What's a pirate's favorite book?
A pirate's favorite book. I don't know. Treasure Island.
Hardy Boys.
Hardy Boys. Okay.
I'm not sure which one.
You want to have one?
Do you have one, Eliza? You want to share with me? Do you want Mom to share it for you? Okay, tell Mom.
Which one is it? The butterfly one or
The one in my
I don't know which one.
car. The scooter one.
Oh, why did our friend Scooter throw butter out of the window?
Boy, you stumped me. I have no idea. What's the answer, Eliza?
Make the butterfly.
Just to see butterfly.
Oh. Well, I'm not sure I want to see that kind of butterfly.
Might be a little messy.
Yeah, but I bet pretty soon we're going to start to see some real butterflies in your garden.
Yep.
Right? Yeah,
And bees.
and bees too. We need bees, right? So be
Yeah.
sure to go out and celebrate in your garden for Earth Day, okay?
Yeah.
We will.
And we'll see you soon.
We miss you.
Mama, I
had a
really fun dream.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, look who's here. Hi, Natalie. Hi. What are you doing?
Oh, you have a joke? Natalie
Okay.
has a joke, apparently.
Go ahead.
What's your joke?
What's the joke, Natalie?
A balloon flying away from you. That's the joke.
Oh, do
Is
I
that
run
funny?
and catch it?
Another one.
Yeah. So we have been, last fall, we planted a bunch of daffodils and tulips in our front gardens.
Oh.
And so every day we've been going out and seeing how much taller they're grown. And now there's a bunch of buds on them.
Oh, wow.
Natalie's excited. This is the first time we've had daffodils.
I love daffodils. They're so pretty and they make me happy. You know, they're full of joy.
Mm-hmm.
So you
And then
keep
we-
watching those, Natalie.
Mm-hmm. We have
How
a
you
bunch of
doing?
daylilies too that are going to be orange when they
Oh.
bloom, but those are later.
That's fun.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's my garden.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
Natalie's
that's
garden.
your garden. Great. Well, take care of it. Okay. Water it. Okay.
That's your garden right here.
Yeah.
But mine is on the other side.
Yeah, yours is on the other side.
Nice to see you guys.
Can you say bye to Vicki?
Bye, Mickey.
Bye-bye. Well, I think that's all we have. So I'll say bye, and later I'll go plant my beautiful. Can you see them? They're so pretty. I love pansies. Remember to be a pansy. Stand up for what you believe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vicki.
Good morning. I am Carolyn McCreary, formerly the director and accompanist for the Artemis Singers, and currently the audio engineer and tech support for the group. Amidst this terrible pandemic, we paused to recognize what was happening 100 years ago during and directly following the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak. In 1920, women in these United States won the right to vote. It was nearly 100 years from the beginning of the suffrage movement until the 19th constitutional amendment was passed. We are inspired by the courage, persistence, and sacrifice of our mothers' mothers in their fight for equal rights for women. Today, we hear the voices of 5 of those suffragettes, as well as a social justice moment concerning voting rights in 2020. We will sing songs of that movement and invite you to sing along. Typically, protest songs use familiar tunes and add words of the movement. We will provide you with the lyrics and identify the tune. Our prelude and virtual parade, The Women Are Coming to Vote, was based on the tune The Campbells Are Coming, an Irish melody. and features the voices of our children with those of the Artemis Singers. Our next song, Taxation Tyranny, expresses in stark terms the duplicity of denying women the right to vote when we as a country engaged in a revolutionary war over that identical issue. It is sung to the tune of Columbia, Gem of the Ocean. Feel free to join us in song, but mute your audio because of the time delay.
Elizabeth Cady, who is better known by her married name, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was born in 1850 and died in 1902. She and her collaborator and friend, Susan B. Anthony, are possibly the best known American leaders of the women's rights movement and are often thought of and spoken of together. In their political work, they emphasized a woman's right to vote. However, they were also abolitionists. That is, they were opposed to slavery and ultimately in favor of the right of Black men and women to vote. As you will hear, they ultimately failed to remain faithful to the cause of the Black women's vote. Elizabeth was a brilliant writer and contributed books, speeches, and what could be called manifestos to the movement. She and her husband were not wealthy, and furthermore, they had 7 children. Both facts made it difficult for her to travel in pursuing her life of advocacy. So sometimes Elizabeth wrote the speeches which Susan delivered, and at other times, Susan babysat for Elizabeth's young children so that Elizabeth could go on the road to be a speaker as well. Growing up in those times, few women received more than a finishing school education. They learned manners, niceties, sewing, and crocheting. In researching Elizabeth Cody's life, I learned that she was a brilliant woman. Furthermore, her mind was encouraged at home, especially by her lawyer father. And she was sent to the only existing women's school of higher education in the nation at that time, founded by an even earlier feminist and crusader, Emma Willard. Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary, now known as the Emma Willard School for Girls. She graduated in 1832. And as it happened, so did her friend, Susan B. Anthony, around 1845. And as it happened, so did my great-great-grandmother, Margaret Jane Stevens Marvin, around 1870. And so did my grandmother, Caroline Marvin, around 1895. Both of those Marvin women were residents of Troy, New York. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is best represented by two documents: the Declaration of Affections, modeled upon the Declaration of Independence, and the Women's Bible, modeled on the Bible. And I'll read to you now some excerpts from this piece. It's actually called the Declaration of Sentiments. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single, the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. He has denied her the facilities of obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and to God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States. In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule, but we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object, firmly relying upon the final triumph of the right and the true. We do this day affix our signatures to this declaration.
Hello. Susan Brunell Anthony was born February 15th, 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts. Her parents were Quakers, so she was raised in an atmosphere of independent thought and strong ethics. She was a precocious child and learned to read and write at the age of 3. Her parents moved from Massachusetts to Batonsville, New York, when she was 6. At 19, she took a position in a Quaker seminary in New Rochelle, New York. Later, she taught at a women's academy in upstate New York. Anthony settled in her family home, now near Rochester, New York. They were involved in the fight. Her whole family was involved in the fight to end slavery. There she met many leading abolitionists, including Frederick Douglass, William Henry Channing, and
William Lloyd Garrison. Anthony promoted the cause up until the Civil War. She also became involved in the temperance movement, which was aimed at limiting or completely stopping the production of sale of alcohol. She was denied a chance to speak at a temperance convention in 1852 because she was a woman. This prompted her to start the Women's New York State Temperance Society. She was a tireless worker whose personality contrasted sharply with her friend and co-worker Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she became a prime target of public abuse. When the Civil War was over, Anthony began focusing more on women's rights. She and Stanton established the American Equal Rights Association in 1866. She campaigned unsuccessfully to have the language of the 14th Amendment altered to allow for women as well as African American suffrage. In 1868, Anthony and Stanton created and began producing The Revolution, a weekly publication that lobbied for women's rights. The newspaper's motto was men, their rights and nothing more, women, their rights and nothing less. In 1870, she relinquished her position at the Revolution and embarked on a series of lecture tours to pay off the paper's accumulated debts. As a test of the legality of the suffrage provision of the 14th Amendment, she cast a vote in 1872, the presidential election in Rochester, New York. She was arrested and convicted. The judge's verdict of guilty had been written before the trial began. She was fined $100. She refused to pay the fine, but the case was carried no further. She gave a speech after her arrest, which became very popular. After the introduction, she says, she stated, the preamble of the federal Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to perform a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, or yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people, who formed the Union. She continued with her argument and ended by asking, Are women persons? Being persons, then, women are citizens, and no state has the right to make any law or enforce any old law that will abridge their privileges. By the 1890s, Anthony outlived all the abuse and sarcasm she had suffered and gone through, and was considered a national heroine. Anthony died on March 13, 1906, at the age of 86, in her home in Rochester, New York, 14 years before the 19th Amendment was passed. According to her obituary in the New York Times, shortly before her death, Anthony told her friend Anna Shaw, "To think I have had more than 60 years of hard struggle for a little liberty, and then to die without it seems so cruel."
British women gained the right to vote in 1918. Their struggle was very influential in our suffrage movement. We honor those women with the song Sister Suffragette from the movie Mary Poppins. I was struck to realize that our daughters' daughters referenced in the song are actually us. Again, you're invited to join us in the singing.
We're clearly soldiers in petticoats, dauntless creators for women's votes. Though we adore men individually, we agree that as a group they're rather stupid. Cast off the shackles of yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our daughters will adore us, and they'll sing in grateful chorus. Well done, sister suffragettes. From Kensington to Billingsgate, one hears the restless cries. From every corner of the land, womenkind arise. Political equality and equal rights with men. Take heart, for Mrs. Pankhurst has been clapped in irons again. No more the meek and mild subservient we. We're fighting for our rights militantly. So cast off the shackles of yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our daughters will adore us, and we'll sing in grateful chorus. Well done, well done, well done, sister suffragette.
The song you just heard is from the movie Mary Poppins. The Mrs. Pankhurst who was clapped in irons again was the political activist Emmaline Pankhurst, who was renowned for her role in the women's suffrage movement in Britain. Calling for deeds, not words, she espoused civil disobedience as a means of drawing public attention to the cause. Pankhurst gave one of her most famous speeches in Hartford, Connecticut in late 1913. I offer you the following excerpts from that speech. I am here as a soldier who has temporarily left the field of battle in order to explain what civil war is like when civil war is waged by women. The grievances of those who have got power, the influence of those who have got power, commands a great deal of attention. But the wrongs and the grievances of those people who have no power at all are apt to be absolutely ignored. That is the history of humanity right from the beginning. They have said to us, government rests upon force. The women haven't force, so they must submit. Well, we are showing them that government does not rest upon force at all. It rests upon consent. As long as women consent to be unjustly governed, they can be. But directly, women say, we withhold our consent. We will not be governed any longer, so long as that government is unjust. I think there are very few men today who would be prepared to adopt a hunger strike for any cause. It is only people who feel an intense sense of oppression who would adopt a means of that kind. It means you refuse food until you are at death's door, and then the authorities have to choose between letting you die and letting you go, and then they let the women go. This went on so long that, to the shame of the British government, they set the example to authorities all over the world of feeding women, sane women, resisting human beings by force. The government thought they had crushed us, but they found that it did not quell the agitation, that more and more women came in and even passed that terrible ordeal, and they were obliged to let them go. It has come to a battle between the women and the government as to who shall yield first, whether they will yield and give us the vote, or whether we will give up our agitation. Well, they little know what women are. Women are very slow to rouse, but once they are aroused, once they are determined, nothing on earth and nothing in heaven will make women give way. It is impossible. We have brought the government of England to this position, that it has to face this alternative. Either women are to be killed or women are to have the vote. They will have to choose between giving us freedom or giving us death. Pankhurst's tactics alienated some, including 2 of her own daughters. It took the advent of World War I to shift her focus. She called for an end to civil disobedience and instead pressed the government to allow women to work in factories so that more men could go off to war. Historians are divided as to whether Pankhurst's tactics were helpful or harmful. However, there is wide agreement that increased public awareness was essential to the success of women's suffrage movement. In 1918, women over 30 in Britain were given the right to vote.
One of the most effective ways to influence the outcome of an election is to discourage and prevent people from voting. This has taken many forms, from denying women the vote for 143 years to suppressing the voting of African Americans up until the 1960s. You can see the barriers listed on the screen. The Voting Rights Act in 1965 remedied many of these crimes against democracy, but which the Supreme Court of today has weakened. Now, last week, Carl talked about in the Wisconsin election of April 7th, and the Republican-held State House insisted to hold the election on that day. When voting is made more dangerous or inconvenient, the voters who stay home, they're called intermittent voters, are usually more progressive, younger, and I bet it won't surprise you, they're non-white. Trump won Wisconsin by only 23,000 votes, which means every vote counts there. In Georgia, they almost elected the first African-American woman governor in 2018. She was a state legislator. Stacey Abrams lost to the man who ran the election, Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp. In 2017, he purged 1.5 million voter registrations, 1.4. On election day, voters in majority Black districts had to wait up to 2.5 hours to vote, while hundreds of voting machines sat unused in government warehouses. So racism tainted the suffrage movement, which was put on hold during the Civil War. Then the suffragists split between those who supported the 15th Amendment and those who wanted women to get the vote before Black men, caused a major rift between Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. During Reconstruction, Black men were elected to state, local, and national offices. White Southerners did not like it, and they began actively suppressing voters. This is one extremely effective way to suppress voters and scare people into submission. So, Ida B. Wells, a Black woman journalist, made it her life mission to shine the light of print journalism on lynching. She was born a slave at the end of the Civil War. She became an activist after she was thrown off a train for refusing to move to the colored car. Then a lynching in 1892 roused her anger again. She began attending lynchings as a journalist and shined the bright spotlight of the press on this heinous practice of Black intimidation. The 19th Amendment gave all women the vote, in theory. However, Black women in the South and many Latinas couldn't vote because of the restrictions mentioned earlier. When the women of color asked the suffragists for help, they were told, "That's a race question. It doesn't concern us." Now, 60 years after the Civil Rights Movement, many states have imposed the restrictions you see on the screen. Now, you might wonder why needing a government photo ID is difficult for some people. Some people can't afford the fee. They can't get a ride to the DMV. They may not have a driver's license. They may not be able to pay for a lost birth certificate. And 36 states have ID requirements, including 7 that require photo IDs. Today, you can help one person. Crystal Mason is in a Texas prison because she attempted to vote. She wasn't even successful. She simply filed a provisional ballot, which means if the election is close, they'll check her credentials and then make it count, okay? She was on parole and no one told her she could not vote. The state didn't even count the provisional ballot and they sentenced her to 5 years in jail. If you click on this link or put it into your browser, you can sign a petition for her freedom. So contrast that with Terry Lynn Road, a white Iowa woman who tried to cast a second ballot for Trump in 2016. She was sentenced to 2 years probation and a $750 fine. Last year, a white Republican justice of the peace in Texas pled guilty to submitting fake signatures to get on the ballot. His punishment, a mere 5 years probation. It all depends on who you know and what color you are. There are 2 excellent movies on voter suppression available on Amazon Prime. Our democracy depends on you and me to speak up, to protect everyone's right to vote. And Winston Churchill said it best, democracy is the worst form of government ever invented, except for all the others.
This is a chance to take our morning's offering. Next week, we will indeed have a Share the Plate Sunday, where we will offer up our virtual donations to a charity that you'll learn about next week. But this week, as we do often 3 out of 4 weeks, our offering is in fact to support First Church Unitarian. And you can donate for the good works of this church, either through the U.S. Postal Service, sending it to the address you see there, 19 Foster Street in Littleton, Massachusetts. Or you can go online. We have a donate button now on our website, which is FCU for First Church Unitarian, fculittle.org. And in the upper right, you will see the donate button. I want to thank again Artemis, just while I'm on here live, saying that this is great and really appreciate all the effort that went into this. Thank you so much. And to Carolyn McCreary for leading Artemis. This is a wonderful effort, so thank you. But this morning's offering will be given and received in grateful appreciation.
Our offertory is Hallelujah Song, sung to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Our hearts have felt the glory of the time, when law and right and love and might shall make our lives one. When mountain, hill, and rock and rill with freedom's light will shine, as true as marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As truth is marching on. We're here to serve the anthem that is heard across the sea, that equal rights in one life is meant for you and me. Where heaven belongs and
It's been an enlightening experience to look at the history of the women's suffrage movement. I thought I knew a fair amount about the suffragettes, but didn't comprehend how long the campaign took to gain the right for women to vote. It certainly required fearless fortitude and dogged determination on the part of the women leading the campaign and their dedicated followers, of course. One of the leaders that I hadn't heard much about is Carrie Chapman Catt. Triple C, I call her. She was a politically astute, pragmatic problem solver and was also a very persuasive speaker. I can see her fitting into our current politician group. Carrie grew up in Iowa, graduated from college in 1880. She was the only woman in her class. She worked as a teacher and a school superintendent until she moved to San Francisco with her first husband. And after being widowed, she remained there to become the first woman reporter in that city. Eventually, she returned to Iowa, married a wealthy engineer who supported her involvement in the movement. Carrie worked with the National American Woman Suffrage Association in Iowa and came to the attention of Susan B. Anthony, who invited her to speak at the National Convention in 1890, and then requested that she address the Congress on the proposed 19th Amendment in 1892. In 1900 to 1904, she served as the president of the NAWCSA, succeeding Susan B. Anthony. Then she left to care for her ailing husband, and when she returned 10 years later, the association had become divided over political strategy. Carrie disagreed with the more radical members, particularly Alice Paul, who you'll probably hear about later. She became president of the NAWSA again in 1915 until 1920, and during that time increased the size and influence of the organization. She advocated for what she called a winning plan, and that was to have all the representatives and senators from different states support the suffrage amendment with the goal of obtaining suffrage on both the state and federal levels, and to work toward a compromise with states who were resisting the change. At that time, there were 10 Western states that enfranchised women. In 1917, New York became the first Eastern state to allow the women's vote. In that same year, Carrie Chapman Catt again addressed the Congress. Here's a bit of what she said. Woman suffrage is inevitable. 3 distinct causes make it inevitable. First is the history of our country. The American revolutionists boldly proclaimed taxation without representation is tyranny, and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. These 2 fundamental principles of democratic government are not only the spiritual source of our national existence, but have been our chief historic pride and at times the sheet anchor of our liberties. Second, the suffrage for women already established in the United States makes women's suffrage inevitable. Our nation cannot long continue a condition under which the government in half of its territory rests upon the consent of half of the people, and in the other half upon the consent of all the people. Third, the leadership of the United States in a world democracy compels the enfranchisement of its own women. Do you realize that in no other country in the world with democratic tendencies is suffrage so completely denied as in a considerable number of our own states? The time for women's suffrage has come. If parties prefer to postpone the action longer and thus do battle with this idea, they challenge the inevitable. The idea will not perish. The party which opposes it may. Can you afford the risk? Think it over. Is there any real gain for your party, for your nation, by delay? Do you want to drive the progressive men and women out of your party? Some of you hold the doctrine of states' rights as applying to women's suffrage. Adherence to that theory will keep the United States far behind all other democratic nations upon this question. Women's suffrage is coming. You know it. Will you, honorable senators and members of the House of Representatives, help or hinder it? During World War I, Carrie made a controversial decision to support the war effort, which made the suffragists appear to be more patriotic and helped to gain the support of President Wilson in 1918. It still took 2 more years for the 19th Amendment to be ratified by all the states. In 1920, Carrie Chapman Catt returned to her anti-war peace efforts and founded the League of Women Voters.
My name is Alice Paul. Some of you may remember me, some not. But I was born in 1855 in New Jersey to Quaker parents. I was among the first leaders and strategists for the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, prohibiting sex discrimination and the right to vote. My only vision was an ordinary notion that women and men should be partners in society. I worked in the settlement movement in New York, and because of this work, I decided to go to Birmingham, England to study social work. That's where I met Christabel Pankhurst. She was the daughter of Emmaline Pankhurst, who was known as England's most radical suffragette. Their motto was deeds, not words. They believed in direct visible measures such as hackling, window smashing, so on, to raise public awareness of the suffragette issues. I joined the movement, and I actually was arrested several times for breaking windows and such. And when I returned to the US, I had new ideas regarding the suffragette movement. The militant policy was certainly working in England. So I joined the American Women's Suffragette Association, known as NAWSA. Several other suffragettes and myself organized a massive parade of women to march down Pennsylvania Avenue. And this actually coincided with President Wilson's inauguration. So we were attacked by male onlookers. And at first it was just, obscene gestures and jeers and such. But then it became really physical, and they were attacking us. And the police did nothing to stop these men at all. However, the outcome was we became headlines across the nation's newspapers and became a topic of discussion. Carrie Catt was the NAWSA president, and she and I we shared many of the same goals, but it was on how to reach these goals that we differed. So at that time, we severed our relationship with the NAWAS and formed the National Women's Party, known as the NWP. We organized silent sentinels to stand outside the White House holding banners inscribed with incendiary phrases directed towards President Wilson. At first, we were just ignored. And then World War I began, and many saw us as unpatriotic. We were arrested and on the charges of obstructing justice. No, obstructing traffic. We were sent to the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia, and we demanded to be treated like political prisoners. And our demands were met with such brutality. We were beaten and we were thrown in cold, horrible cells where they were rat infested and very unsanitary. And several of us staged hunger strikes. For this, we were brutally forced to be fed by putting a tube down our nose. It was really gross. And then after they did that, they sent me to what do you call those? They sent me to a sanitarium, and they were trying to show that I was insane. That didn't work. When news of the prison conditions and hunger strikes became known, the press, some of the politicians, and the public began demanding women's suffrage release. The sympathy for prisoners brought many to support the cause of the women's suffrage. In response to the public outcry, President Wilson reversed his position on suffragettes, and he announced that he was supporting the amendment. He called it a war measure. In 1919, both House and Senate passed the 19th Amendment. The amendment needed 3/4 of the states to ratify the amendment. Thus, the battle for ratification began. It came down to one state, Tennessee. Finally, in the summer of 1920, Tennessee did ratify the amendment. After the Secretary of State Colby certified the ratification, white women gained the right to vote after a 72-year battle. August 26th is now celebrated as Women's Equality Day in the U.S. I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. I mean, most reforms and most problems are complicated. But to me, there's nothing complicated about ordinary equality.
Give the Ballot to the Mothers is a rousing song to the tune of Marching Through Georgia.
Bring the good old bugle boys, we'll sing another song. Sing it with a spirit that shall start the cause along. Sing it as we ought to sing it, cheerily and strong. Giving the ballot to the mothers. Hurrah, hurrah, we bring the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the homes they shall be free. So we'll sing the chorus from the mountains to the sea, giving the ballot to the mothers. Bring the dear old banner, boys, and fling it to the wind. Mother, wife, and daughter, let it shelter and defend. Equal rights our motto is, we're loyal to the end. Giving the ballot to the mothers. Hurrah, hurrah, we bring the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the homes they shall be free. So we sing the chorus from the mountains to the sea, giving the ballot to the mothers.
Friends, it is time for our benediction. It's the tradition at First Church Unitarian in Littleton that we get into a circle and hold hands for our benediction. Again, if you are with someone in your home where you can hold hands, please do, if you're comfortable doing that. If not, I invite you to clasp your own hands to feel that warmth. and to hold that feeling until such a time as we can in fact be together again, holding hands. So our benediction. Not every woman, not every person who worked for the women's right to vote lived to 1920. Not everyone who works for something comes to see it happen. There's a proverb that true love and wisdom is planting trees whose shade you will never sit in. May we be so wise and selfless and loving and giving. May it be so. Go in peace. Blessed be, and amen.
The children will join us in singing a new prison song to the tune of I've Been Working on the Railroad. The unfamiliar Zinkum refers to a jail warden. SBA is a Susan B. Anthony amendment, and Woodrow refers to the President Woodrow Wilson.